Hi everybody and welcome back to the Schumacher Mi9 build, and we're going to finish this shock off now. So this has now come out of the air pump, and like I showed before, we sucked the air out and then we released the air and basically moved the piston up and down a few times to release any air that's caught underneath the piston, and sort of repeated that process 3 times sort of over a period of 4 or 5 minutes. And with a bit of luck now, we've got no air in this shock. So we're just going to check it. So basically all we're going to do is just raise the piston up and down nice and smoothly. Obviously we don't want to go too high because we don't want to go above the surface of the oil and suck any new air back in. So we're just going to go up 4 or 5 times, and if we can't see any bubbles forming, no air showing its face, then we can be pretty sure that we've got all the air out and we're good to go. So we'll pop that down there and we'll get that put back together. But first of all, I just want to take you through a couple of the new parts of this shock, which are just fantastic ideas, and the small details that make these shocks as good as they are. So the first part we're going to talk about is the bottom ball cup. So obviously these modern day shocks, they need to be as short as they can possibly be. Everyone wants super short shocks, super low shock towers, center of gravity as low as possible. But obviously you still want a decent amount of shock movement. You still want a decent volume of oil and a decent amount of shock piston travel so that the shock actually works as a proper shock. So you want this ball cup to be as short as possible. But you can only go so short because obviously you've got to be able to screw the shaft into it, and it's got to be able to withstand the loads of the car. So what normally happens is you have this spring seat ball cup that goes on the bottom, and then the spring seat sits over the top of that. And obviously this spring seat is, the plastic one's generally 1 millimeter thick. So the minute you put that in place, you lose 1 millimeter of travel of your shock, which maybe not sound very much, but when you're talking about a full 8 millimeters is the full travel, then 1 millimeter's loss on that is quite a bit. So what Andy's cleverly done is, let me show you, he's basically made it so it's got a seat to sit in. So if you look, the hole in the middle of the spring seat is the same size as the ball cup. So those basically sit into each other. So you end up with it sitting completely flush. So you've lost no up travel whatsoever, but have still got a really tiny little ball cup. Brilliant idea. And then moving on to the top. So normally with a shock, you've got your body, and then the middle plastic part sits in the top there, and then you'll put your retaining cap over the top. And the problem is that can rotate, completely rotate. So when you adjust the spring tension on the spring collar there, I mean, I don't know about you, but the amount of times that I've been adjusting the spring collar to adjust my ride height or my tweak, I'm going to take you through tweak later and show you exactly how I do it. And sometimes you could be just moving it just a tiny amount just to get things where you're happy with. And you'll be moving that spring seat, and you're not actually moving the spring seat to tension the spring, you're just rotating the whole body. And the whole body is rotating around this cap. And it's so frustrating because you think, oh, why is it not moving? And you realise that it's not, because this is wet with oil and it's slippery. So this is just rotating. So what they've cleverly done is put a couple of recesses in the body, and you've got a couple of lugs on the shock cap, and they locate into each other. So now it can't twist. So once that's in place, when you adjust your spring collar, nothing else can move apart from the spring collar. So you turn it, 1 degree or whatever, and you put a slight more, tension on your spring, that's exactly what you've done. You haven't just rotated the cap. It's an absolute game changer for me, and a fantastic idea. And these little things which, they've knocked it out of the park. They've thought about every little thing, and it really is a fantastic car. And these really are the best shocks I've ever used on a touring car. So let's get this one put back together and completely finished. So basically the way I do it now is, as it says in the instructions, you set basically the piston to the amount of rebound you want to have. So generally I would move the piston in so that you've got about 2 millimeters. It's difficult to show you on the camera angle here, but you're basically going to move the piston in until there's a 2 millimeter gap between the ball cup and the bottom of the shock. So you've moved it in all bar 2 millimeters. Now you can just leave it there, hold it there with your finger, try and prop it. But what I do is I use these quick clips, Schumacher quick clips. Now these will be older than most of the people watching these videos, but they're fantastic. They might even still be available, I don't know, but you could get them in 1, 2, 3 millimeter size. And I just use one of these, this 2 millimeter clip, and I'm basically just going to pop that in on the shaft, and then I can push that all the way in and forget about it. I can just hold that with my finger at the bottom and I know that's not going anywhere. So that's exactly 2 millimeters. And I know that I'm going to get a sort of a couple of millimeters of rebound, millimeter and a half. It's going to come out a little bit, which I always want it to come out a little bit, because I think if it's completely dead, there's a very good chance you've left a bit of air in there. But if you always have a little bit of rebound, just, a mil or two, it's not going to affect the car, but you know that, there's no air in there basically. So we're going to get this together now. So we're going to pop the bladder on top. Now what I do is you just want to make sure that the oil is right up to the top now, that it's almost trickling out of the little lugs, the little slots rather, that the lugs sit in on the cap. So it's almost trickling out of there. So it's fully all the way up. And then we're going to pop on the bladder. Now these bladders these days, it's the same with all of these style shocks, they're so short now and everything's so compact and everything's so thin, they're a little bit more tricky to do. You used to be able to just drop them in and plonk them down, screw the cap on and away you go. But now you've got to be a little bit more finesse with it, because the bladders are so thin and so small. So what I do is I use a cotton bud, and basically this works double whammy basically. So I can gently, and you're not really pushing, you're sort of floating it down into place. It's sort of like, I guess, like if you're putting a contact lens in. I don't wear contact lenses, but it sort of seems that sort of style, sort of float it into place. And any oil that sort of spills over the edge and into the center of the bladder, you've then got the cotton bud, which will just mop it up, which is really handy, because now we've got a use for cotton buds, because we're not allowed to put them in our ears anymore. So it's handy, we've got a reason to use them now. So I float that into place, just mopping up any oil that's gone into the center of that bladder. And then it's just a simple case of popping on the cap, again, as we talked about before, locating the little lugs into the little slot. And then we're just going to take the cover, the cap, retaining ring, and pop that into place. Now, I'm trying to be as steady and as careful as I can be, basically. I don't want to dislodge anything. I don't want to move the top or tip the shock body at all. I just want to keep everything steady, keep everything level. And I basically just be really, really careful and smooth until I get that down and I can feel it's gripping the bladder. And once I've got a reasonable amount of tension on that bladder, I can not worry about it then, because it's basically on. Now, I'm going to finish doing this up all the way up, because it has got a stop. So you can go all the way, and that's, you don't have to worry about overdoing it. So go all the way and that's on and it's fine. And then we should have a perfect shock. So we can pop off our little quick clip and push that in, and we should have a lovely smooth shock, no air, and it should hopefully just come out a couple of millimeters. Perfect. And there you go. That should be ideal. So you've just got to do that 3 more times and you've got a lovely set of shocks. Obviously I'll give that a bit of a wipe off. I always find that if you don't get a bit of a mess and a bit of oil everywhere, you probably left some air in there. So it's better to have a little bit of a mess and wipe it off afterwards, rather than be all clean and you haven't had any overfill of oil come out, so you're not really sure whether you've trapped a bit of air in there. So I always go for messy is good and then clean it up afterwards. So there you go, that's the shocks, and I shall see you soon in the next video.